Welcome back, and today we'll be persisting data. So on Android, there are a few storage options available, and you can see them at this link that's in the description below. The one we're going to be using today is the shared preferences. And if you click that, there's an example. We'll be doing something very similar. So before we start using this, we need to understand how the activity life cycles work a little bit better so we can call it at the right times. So far we know how onCreate works. We've used that twice now, and we know that is the first method called when an activity starts. And after that we have onStart and onResume, which they're called almost immediately, and then the activity's running. So the activity is not actually visible until onResume, and after it's called we can assume the activity is visible to the user. Now, if the user ever opens another app or presses the power button so the screen shuts off, the activity will then call the onPause method. And when they return to the app, onResume will get called. And we can assume after onResume is called that our objects in our app or in our activity are safe, they're still available to us, and they still have their same values. However, if the user were to kill their app and turn it off, then the activity would call onPause and then onStop and onDestroy. And at that point, if we turn the app back on, a brand new activity will launch, and all of our data, all of our variables will be reset. There'll be new objects, and the activity will actually be a new object too. And another thing that we need to know about is when the user rotates the screen. If the orientation of the phone switches from portrait to landscape, or vice versa, onPause, onStop, and onDestroy will also get called. And then the activity will be recreated in the new orientation, and it will be considered a new activity that's getting launched again and go through the lifecycle methods again. And this new activity will have new objects again and new variables. So anything you have saved in a variable will not have its value anymore. So what we need to do, and what you'll see that they do in the example for shared preferences, is they'll use onCreate and onStop. And from onStop, they will save their data into shared preferences, and from onCreate, they'll load their data. Which makes sense. When the activity is stopping, we want to save the state of the app, and when it's starting, we want to load the state of the app. So let's do that with our example app. The first thing we need to do is override onStop, and from here we'll get a reference to shared preferences using get shared preferences. And if we take a look at the constructor of it, we see it needs a string for name, which is essentially the name of a file that we want to use, and an integer for mode, which stands for operating mode. And most commonly, and almost every single time, you'll use mode private. And we use mode private so only our application can access this file that we're creating or using. So now let's make a string for the file name. We can just call this pref's name. And if we go back down here and use it, and then use mode private, and then we need to edit the preferences. And we'll use .edit to get an editor. We can now put values into the shared preferences, similar to how we put values into intents over here. Let's take a look. And so we can convert this into a set. I think that's a little boring. let's do it where we put an integer for the size of the array list, and then we'll loop through and append the index values to some string for each value of the list. So that, I mean, it sounds a little confusing when I say it out loud, but once you see it in practice, it'll make a lot of sense. Let's just erase this real fast. So the first thing we'll do is add 2 strings. One will be called prefs item. Make sure you change the value of it. And prefs item size. Alright, now what we'll do is with the shared preferences, we'll get the editor from it. And then inside of the editor, or let's get an integer now for size, and that'll be size of list items. And we'll put this in the editor, put int, using the prefs item size key and the size value. And then we need to iterate through it with an indexed for loop. And now this is where we need to put in a string with the prefs item plus I and the value of item lists or list items dot get I. So we're making kind of a unique string for each item. And now we need to commit this or apply this. Editor.apply. And now we've saved the array list to shared preferences. And from onCreate, we just need to load it. So we'll get an integer for size. Or actually, sorry, we need to get the shared preferences using that same prefs name and mode private. And now we need to make an integer for size. And you don't need to use the editor when you get from it. You can just use the shared preferences. So get int prefs item size, and the default value will be 0. And now we can do another indexed for loop. I less than size, I plus plus. And we'll do the same thing we did, except we'll get the string from it. Using that same sort of unique string. And what does it want? This one. And it wants a default value if they can't find one, and we'll just use null. That's fine. Now in the array list of list items, we'll add each item. So by the time we add it to the adapter, everything should be added back. So let's run this. And I'm going to add a few names. And we'll kill the app. And then we'll open it. And we see the names are back in the same order. And everything's great. And let's just change this. And we'll rotate it now. and everything's fine. Everything's still in there. Okay, so that's a quick intro into using shared preferences. And if you have any questions, just write me a comment.